Your article title today is How to Write an Impact Letter for Infidelity Recovery. So what inspired you to write this article?
Yeah, so this was kind of an extension of our current infidelity recovery process. So we have had for quite some time, we've had the betraying spouse writing the disclosure letter to their spouse, to the what we call the betrayed spouse. And so this was an opportunity. This is something that we just really felt there was a need for, which is how do they respond to that? Can they respond in the same way that this was, in that form of a letter where they're able to kind of articulate their thoughts and sit down with all of these kind of crazy, raging, chaotic, overwhelming feelings inside of them and try to organize it and put it into words and put it on paper, and so that their voice can be heard, because they're the ones, right, that their pain needs to be honored. And so this was really this kind of came out of a place of need in our recovery work, to give the betrayed spouse a voice in this process.
That's amazing. And so when you wrote this article, was it just for the betrayed spouse to read, or who do you think would benefit from reading it then?
Yeah, so it's specifically written for the betrayed spouse. Now, the betraying spouse is welcome to read it. Anyone who's walking through infidelity recovery or knows someone who is walking through infidelity recovery, I think would benefit from it. But it's very specifically written to the betrayed spouse, because it's really, like I said, it's helping them to organize their thoughts and their kind of internal world into words in order to be able to communicate it to their spouse.
That makes sense. So you called it an impact letter. Can you explain more of like what that is, or even like why it's important to have an impact letter?
Sure. So the impact letter, to really gets the idea is that this thing that you have done has impacted me deeply. There is nothing really more disorienting and disorganizing in our internal world than infidelity. Because it's like we stand at the altar and we pledge our life to someone, and we think that this is going to be for death to us part and forsaking all others, and we make these commitments and vows to one another, and then our partner goes outside of that and they chose someone else over us, right? Or they kind of flirted with lines, or whether it's they used pornography, or they got into an emotional relationship or a physical sexual relationship, and it just kind of has this ability to like fray the fabric of who we are, because we see ourselves as one, right? God has said that let two become one. And so we have united ourselves with this person, believing that our life is going to be built on the foundation of this relationship going forward. And so when infidelity comes into a relationship, it completely is disorienting to all of that, the way that I view myself as kind of, my person's other half, right? Now it's like, who am I? What am I doing here? So it's so disorienting to the person. And so this is really necessary. This impact letter is so necessary to be able to give that space, to be able to say, I've been impacted deeply, not just on the surface, right? Like you didn't just go outside of our relationship, but this impacts who I am and the way that I think about myself and the way that I think about the world and other people and the way I think about God. And so we're creating a lot of space and a lot of structure around being able to take this really disorganized, disoriented, kind of chaotic view of myself that has happened as a result of my partner's affair, and we try to help them to organize it. And it's as much for the betrayed spouse to be able to try to organize their internal world and all of that disruption that's happened as a result of infidelity. And it's also for the betraying spouse to hear and to understand just how deep their partner has been wounded by their actions.
Yeah, it definitely, reading your article, I could definitely I could feel like that pain, and even just the poignancy of like pointing out kind of like, you're right, like everything's impacted. It's not just, oh, my marriage was just impacted. Like it kind of touches so many parts of our life, especially even our relationship with God and worldview and view of ourselves, all these things. So it sounds just like a really overwhelming process to write this letter. Do you mind, is there a process to doing that? Is there different steps we should go through if we need to write a letter like this?
Yeah, I liken it as a Floridian, I liken it to what it's like to go through a hurricane, right? So hurricanes, and as Floridians, I kind of use a little bit of that analogy in the article, because this first step, so the step one is what we call inventorying the impact. And that's just kind of what I think of as like the bird's eye view, high level. I'm looking at all of the damage being done. And I'm kind of like taking like a survey of the full range of the pain, a full range of the damage, right? And I kind of liken that to when there's a hurricane, like, and we're seeing it all over the news, right? You're seeing the destruction, you're seeing the devastation, right? And you get these like helicopter kind of overhead views of all of the destruction, and you're just like, oh, and just devastated by how much has been impacted. And that's really this first step, is inventorying the impact, just kind of taking a survey of all of the areas that have been touched in life. And then in the second step, we go to examine the damage. And so that's what I kind of liken to, like, sometimes you don't even have power. You don't even have power to turn on the news to see where the damage is. All I have to do is walk out my front door. And when I walk outside my front door, there's power lines down, and there's, trees in the road, and there's, just, it's everywhere. There's just debris everywhere. And it's that same idea of now we're like feet are on the ground. We're no longer at that bird's eye view. And we're really looking at what has been impacted. And this is really the how I've been impacted, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So step one was more like the what of what's been impacted. Step two, in examining the damage, is really, how I've been impacted by this. And really kind of talking through each of those areas. So in the letter, in the article, I talk about, in step one, I go through all of these different possibilities of areas that have been touched, right? So everything from, example would be like, my trust, my emotional and mental health, my self-worth, my spirituality, my children, my work, my family, my friendships, sexuality, vulnerability, my story. And so that's kind of all in step one. And so in step two, when we examine the damage, we go in depth. We kind of take a dive into each one of those. And we go into how have those things been impacted by the infidelity. And so we kind of really develop that. And then in the third step, which I think can be one of the hardest parts, the third step is to give our emotions a voice. And the reason why I say this is the hardest part is because infidelity is relational trauma, right? This is relational trauma. And what happens when we're traumatized is we have this tendency, our brain, because it's protective and it's adaptive and it knows what to do and how to protect us, it dissociates. And so oftentimes what happens is I will unintentionally, kind of unconsciously, like bubble wrap all of my feelings. Right. And it's like, I can't even touch that. I have to stay in my head. I have to think through what my next step is. Right. But then because we avoid them, they tend to kind of blow up. Right. So we have these really big, like, emotional dysregulation kind of eruption that happens. And so and then we suppress it again, and then it erupts again, and we suppress it again. So what we do in step three is really, allowing ourselves to really feel into the pain, right? Not in a way that's like overwhelming, but in a way that wraps words around what I'm feeling about all of this, right? So like, I'm actually going to put words to my pain, and that is a hard thing to do, right? And so I liken this, in that hurricane metaphor, to what happens inside my house, right? What happens when the tree goes through my window? Or comes over my roof, right? And the roof is pulled off of my house. It's that deep devastation, this place where I thought I was safe, this place where I thought I was known. And instead, what I get is fear, right? I get fear, and I get sadness, and I have anger. And we allow, we really welcome and invite the betrayed spouse to wrap language around what they're going through in step three. And this is a hard process. I tell the clients in this is, feel free to walk away and come back to this as many times as you need to. This is not a one and done kind of process. This is a deeply emotional process. And then step four is what I call, is kind of what I liken it to, like making your insurance claim, right? Which is like, how am I going to recoup everything I've lost? And that is step 4 is owning your needs, right? So now you have a chance to ask for what you need from your spouse, right? If that is, daily moments of connection, daily touch points, if you need, really anything that you need kind of on that like emotional level, then that's where this is the place where you get to ask for that, right? This is where you are invited, and we encourage our clients to really ask for whatever they need on that emotional, mental, relational level. We have something separate called a transparency plan, which is that's a separate piece of this infidelity recovery process, where they talk about, one of the needs oftentimes is for transparency. They need their spouse to be honest and transparent with them. And so we have a whole separate article on transparency planning and kind of what we need to look at and where we need to be transparent and what that looks like. So that's a little bit separate. So I just wanted to make mention of that, because you definitely need transparency, but we kind of make that a separate thing here.
Okay.
And so this step, we're really talking about the emotional and mental kind of needs that you have and relational needs you have from your spouse. And then the 5th step is to put it all together. So we put steps 1 through 4 all together in a letter. And you will sit down in a session with your therapist and with your betraying spouse, and you honor your voice, and you honor the wounds and the pain, and you speak all of it to them. And it's such an important process.
Do you feel like it's for people who have been betrayed? It sounds like this is a really intense emotional process. Like kind of you have that, you can go to it, come back. Like, do you typically put a time frame for like when to have this done? Or is it really just on the betrayed spouses, like just when they feel like they're ready to start writing that?
Yeah, so we kind of follow a process, or what we call a protocol within affair recovery, which is that there is the disclosure letter first, and then there's the transparency plan, and then comes the impact letter. And so there's a kind of a method there in terms of why we want to do it that way. And so this is kind of the third big benchmark, if you will, in the recovery process. And so it's important. Now, in terms of how long it takes the person to write the letter, like as a therapist, I'm going to be meeting with them to be supporting them through this process, because it is such an emotionally laden process. So I'm going to be meeting with them individually to kind of help them to write it, to help support them as they're walking through all of the emotions that are coming up as they are writing the letter. And then we typically will book like a double session in order for the spouse. So for the person to be able to read their impact letter to the betraying spouse and really get to kind of unpack all of that. And so yeah, it's definitely an intense process, and we kind of go at the rate that the client needs us to, as slow as we need to.
That's awesome. So I really liked in your article, you said that the brain processes emotional pain the same way it processes physical pain. And I really liked when kind of going back to, because we're talking through all these steps, and just that one, I think it's step 3, maybe step 4, about like naming, like putting naming the emotions that's kind of going through it. And it just seemed like, and I appreciated you saying that, because it kind of gave like freedom. Like if you're going through like physical trauma or physical pain, like you would have to address it. You can't just oh, my arm's broken, I'm just gonna ignore it and hope that we'll get better. And it's hard. It's kind of hard to hear. I mean, even reading it, thinking about other emotional trauma, like it's like, oh, I forget. Yeah, like you have to really face those emotions to like heal from them. And that's one of the big things I got from your article, and why this impact letter is so important is, besides like narrating it for the betraying spouse, is really just for your own self to heal, is what it seems like.
Right. Absolutely. And I would say that's kind of the entire affair recovery process in counseling, is helping the betrayed spouse to feel their emotions and to feel the support of the therapist as they're feeling their way into their trauma. And really, Brittany, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, goodness, this letter could be applied to a multitude of traumas, right? Anytime you've gone through emotional trauma, I hadn't even thought about it that way, but you're right. It's like, it's so important. We go through hard things. And especially, I think, in Western culture and in American culture, I think that we are really quick to just be like, got to get over it, got to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and just push through. And that is not how the brain works. That's not how healing works. And so we really do have to allow ourselves to feel our way through these emotions, through the pain. We have to honor our pain and allow someone to care for us, right? That is the body of Christ. Like, that is what we are meant to do. We are not meant to be an island. We're not meant to be alone. And so it's so important that we feel more resourced and we feel more supported to face our pain when there's somebody there alongside us. And that's my job as a therapist. And it's honestly what I love and what is an honor and a privilege to do.
Yeah, I can definitely tell that, like, talking with you, that you really do feel honored to help couples with this. So is there any final piece of advice for anyone watching this, for the couples that are watching this, that you would give them as they're maybe facing this daunting part of their marriage?
Yeah, I guess I think that the only piece of advice that really comes to mind is I think the kind of the cry of my heart right now is like, I guess I kind of want to say to whoever's watching, like, let us help you. Like, let us help you. So often it's such a shameful process for both parties whenever we're going through infidelity, right? And it's like, you are not alone. You don't have to face this alone. Like, let us support you and love you through this process. You don't, as you just mentioned, right? You can ignore the pain of your broken arm, but what's going to happen? It's just going to heal in a way that's faulty, and it's never going to work the same again, right? It has to be reset. And that's our job, right? Our job is to help you heal properly, right? And restore what has been broken.